Well, wasn't that a great series of discovery thinking talks? And since we're in the mood, let's expand our thinking to the greatest petroleum basins on the planet. So today, I want to visit with you about what have we learned from 5+ years of discovery thinking programs. We've had 14 events, several thousand people have attended, and it's a great honor to be here with you today. I have to say that Mike Halbouty was a true hero of mine. And for all of the young professionals in the audience, as I once was when I met Mike Halbouty, I think there's a powerful lesson. I got to know Mr. Halbouty because I went and wanted to work with him on projects I knew that would be of great interest to him. And as I approached him how I could help him, it became very clear that he took an interest in me. And I think that lesson learned for me as a young professional, if you want great mentors to help, offer to help them first. And we became good friends, and it was a great gift. A couple of words of tribute here. So I did a study of the AAPG Powers medalists because I believe that those professionals within our society that we recognize with this award have something important to say. So I did a project where I was powering up with the Powers medalists, and each and every one of the Powers medalists of the past has a thing. For example, Bob Mitchum is sequence stratigraphy and Peter Vale. Um, Mike Forrest, among many things, has a prominent attribute analysis. Other individuals had a thing. But what was remarkable about Halbouty is he had many things. He was an expert on giant fields. He started the memorial, the memoirs in the Gulf Coast, the salt domes. He preached about stratigraphic traps, and I do mean preached. He talked about the heritage of the petroleum geologists and the importance of leaving it better for those who come after us. And he talked about a thing called maximum brain power, which is really just the integration of geology, geophysics, and engineering. He's way ahead of his times. So that is why he has an enduring legacy. One of the other things is that he really believed in integration, following up on the maximum brain power. So when you visit Texas A&M campus, the Halbouty building, as we did a few months ago, you can see geology on the left, geophysics on the right. And I think that's very appropriate here at the SEG AAPG Image Conference. So in our time together, Mike Halbouty and I would make a habit of attending the Halbouty lectures. The first one was in 2001 with Carolyn Shoemaker, and the last one was John Robbins that Mike was able to attend before he passed away. And we went to each and every one of these, and I had the great, he would always look at me and we'd go and sit together, and he'd tell me what he liked and what he didn't like. And so listen up, everyone. I can tell you the secrets, according to Mike Halbouty, what he likes in a Halbouty lecture. And the answer is simple: maps and cross sections. In other words, things that are useful to practitioners who are trying to find oil and gas. He didn't particularly like graphs or charts or abstract things. He liked three-dimensional things and actually four-dimensional things if you include timing of hydrocarbons. But those were the toolkit that he really celebrated. And so don't worry, I have plenty of maps and cross sections in this presentation, Mike. Thank you for reminding me. The other thing about Mike Halbouty is he was fearless, as anyone who knew him would say. And he talked about some things where The successful leaders of tomorrow are individuals in today's petroleum industry who are dedicated, determined, and purposeful. And that's from 50 years ago. And I think if that rings true today. Now, there's another person, a younger person, that is mentoring me and on courage. And that is a fellow some of you may know, Alex Epstein. And here is Alex. He's walking up against the tide on 6th Avenue of anti-fossil fuel protesters, and he's wearing the I love fossil fuels button. Now, you have to admit, trying to engage in dialogue, you have to admit that takes courage. And so Alex has a few things that I wanted to share with this group about how to we can reframe how energy brings good things to humans. And you can see the bullet points here. Human flourishing is the goal, and affordable and abundant energy lifts people out of energy poverty. Fossil fuels have a unique, reliable energy on demand attribute. They afford us a better quality of living. They protect us from a hostile climate of hot summers, cool winters, drought, famine, flooding. It enables us to use our human ingenuity to master the climate impacts. So I think if you want to know more, Alex is an inspirational and courageous young man, and you can research his work on his webpage. So I think those of us who are in the oil and gas business need to be proud that we're in the oil and gas business. So as we prepare to talk about the super basins, I wanted to talk a little bit about my journey. We talked about Mike Halbouty's journey. So for me, I'm working upwards in this diagram, always looking for analogs, whether they're human success stories that inspire us or individual discoveries, such as we've had featured today and we'll have tomorrow, or in giant fields, or in plays, and now basins and conferences and the in bulletins. And recently we had a very exciting time at the University of Houston, and we hope to go to other universities teaching about the greatest basins. Because one of the keys to success in the exploration process, and I want to thank my buddy Alexei Milkov for this, is that everybody contributes in different ways, but to be the most successful, you have to be able to think on many different levels: basins, plays, leads, prospects. And as you make your decisions, you have to see the linkages between these things. So it's not just a matter of looking at one part of the elephant. And it's great after having all of these discovery thinking. I'd like to weave this into this talk. What are the successful ingredients? And so you can read some of the bullets here. I think continuity of effort is very important. I think having skin in the game is very important. Risk assessment teams and access to experts. In a lot of successful projects that I've been involved in, and perhaps some of you too, is there's often a technologist, a well-integrated team where there could be a technologist who has certain specialized skills that teams up with an integrator, often a geologist. And the most important thing, I think, for anybody who wants to become good in the exploration game is to learn to speak the exploration language through analogs. Analogs are the sentences and the paragraphs that make up the stories of exploration. And so, if you want to immerse in analogs, come see us in the bookstore. We have a new memoir out on giant fields of the last decade. So now that's the introductory material. Now I want to get to the heart of the Halbouty lecture, which is what have we learned and why do we study the world's greatest petroleum basins? And when I was in Columbia University as an undergraduate, I believed then and I believe now that my heroes were the ones who went on the most field trips, who read the most papers, who took the most classes, in short, those who had seen the most. Because geology and geoscience is a very experiential experience. And this graphic implies the neural connectivity from lessons from one basin can help those of us exploring in other basins. And so I want to give a thank you right off the bat. We've had about 5,000 attendees in the Super Basins programs over the last 4 or 5 years. The lessons and the basins that we've studied, you can see some of the highlights here. I want to give a special recognition to Bob Fricklin and Pete Stark, who started from IHS, and fellow APG members who started the concept of the super basins. You can see the onshore basins and the offshore basins. And the technology revitalization is very clear that in the onshore basins, horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing is the technology that has revitalized many of these basins and sweeping across the globe, starting out in North and South America, but progressing all around the globe. And then the offshore basins, enhanced seismic imaging is the key technology. And that is a global phenomenon as well. And yes, another shout out to a dear colleague, Dr. Claudio Bartolini, who is a delight to work with. We are featuring basins around the world in your APG bulletins. And thank you, Dr. Bob Merrill, for supporting this effort. You can see those areas with the heavy red circles. They are either published or a manuscript in review, and we have other basins that are manuscripts in preparation. And our goal is to have a quartet of special bulletins. We have 2 published. We're working on number 3 and number 4. We'd like to see some of these basins as a handy reference guide. So now let's focus on what is the Super Basin Toolkit. Having studied at several Super Basin conferences, we've had about 100 presentations from some of the greatest women and men explorers in their respective basins. And what I believe we can summarize is we'll look at some of the lessons from them in this floor plan. And since there are 7 of them, I would like to say these are 7 habits of highly creative energy geoscientists or oil and gas finders. The technology is a game changer, the source rocks and its various pathways, the reservoir and the architecture, the traps and the tectonics, the language of putting it all together, looking at all kinds of case studies, comparing and contrasting. And then we bring in the commerciality, the economics, which also includes social license environment. And then the 7th habit, for those of you new Covey, is sharpening the saw, which is the thing that continues to rejuvenate us. And that's the creativity, which stems out of multidisciplinary cooperation and, of course, the team workflows. So I love these diagrams. I've shown them at my APG President's Address. It's always good fun to look at a basin like the US Permian. Now we're focusing on technology. The next series of slides, we'll go back and forth. We'll go down the list to each of these topics. They're color coded. So of course, what's always fun is that the golden age of the Permian Basin was in the 1970s. And you can see the prevalent technologies through time. And then suddenly, if you had to predict where things would go, it would have been an amazingly bold prediction in 2010 to 2015 to talk about what actually happened. And the same thing in the offshore. The prediction is that who would have predicted hidden subsalt, pre-salt basins around the world would kick in. This is a graphic that I love to show that I worked with Bob Merrill on. We did a paper. We called it the APG First Century. And we looked at technology over 100 years, and you can see some distinct branches. And the green shading is the price of oil in the background. And the geological concepts are at the top, different types of traps, geophysical developments in blue, petrophysical, and other types of drilling and completion engineering proliferations that continue. These are some of what Rick Fritz calls pivots. We're pivoting at, and I believe, an accelerating rate. And it's interesting that it seems that many pivots happen during low oil prices when pivots need to happen just in time. What's amazing about geoscience is our ability to integrate with engineering. So in the um, onshore world on the left, you can see the many perfections of multi-stage uh, fracking and ever longer drilling and more stacked completions. In the offshore, you can see the incredible engineering developments that make it possible to do go into deeper environments. The integrating with geophysics opens new ways of seeing things, and we don't want to overlook geochemistry. It's really amazing the contributions that geochemistry has made. As we continue to think about technology, let's look at some great examples in the Gulf of Mexico. This is one of our first analogs, and notice maps and cross sections, everyone. Thank you, Mike. Look at this tremendous Gulf of Mexico basin, 260 plus billion barrels of oil equivalent, and there's multiple layers beneath the salt. And you can see here how in this diagram from Tom Ewing that the salt affects the thermal maturity. And similarly, we see, look at the difference in imaging. We'll look at a couple more examples here shortly. And then, of course, in the pre-salt of Brazil, two great companion analogs. I want to thank Jean-Paul Van Gestel and his colleagues at BP and BHP. This is a great example, time slice, 1997. This is the seismic that they had. Looks like a big hide below the salt. Okay, let's drill it. Well, after discovery, after appraisal wells, the seismic keeps getting better, allowing us to see broken up faulting and compartmentalization. Look how complex things are getting. And then with increased 2017 effort, look how much more detail, which is able. And you can see in the seismic also upper left to upper right, lower left to lower right. Look at the increased, look at all this internal precision. Incredible. One of my good buddies, Bill Fairhurst, likes to talk about geoanalytics. In fact, he's getting a PhD in geoanalytics from the OSU school. And it's critical. Couple of things. It's more than just algorithms and understanding mathematics. Having contextual experience at the play and prospect and basin level is very, very critical. And having geologic constructs. And a good example here from Bob Shoup is here are data points contoured on uh, same data points, two different contours. What's different? They both honor the data points, and it's having contextual knowledge that this is a meandering stream system or this is a particular braided stream, and you have to be able to put the context in. So that's toolkit number one is technology. Toolkit number two is source rocks and how they're distributed and how the hydrocarbons move. So we have seen, many of us have seen various versions of the classic periods of source rock richness, very important as you look at basins globally. And one of the things we've come to appreciate is that many of the world's greatest petroleum basins have whispers of other source rocks that are underappreciated. So I want to give a thank you here to Dan Jarvie for helping compose this list. And this is in my AAPG bulletin paper for December 2020 on super basin thinking. And here's a nice example of migration and deeper petroleum systems being detected in geochemical analysis in places of even great petroleum systems yet to be found in the world's greatest basins, yet to be found and fully developed. And if you like Rudyard Kipling as I do, I love his phrase, something hidden, go and find it. And as we look at the various places where oil, gas, and hydrocarbons are found, we know that there are, if the source rocks are down in the organic matter, there are migrated plays, there are plays where there is hybrid, where the transmission of the hydrocarbons through carrier beds occurs. And so there are a lot of new exploration activities in carrier bed type plays. And of course, the unconventional revolution is the source rocks themselves. And their source rocks themselves have different attributes we'll look at in just a moment. One of the greatest ways to approach each superbasin is to do a petroleum folio sheet. And I want to give a shout out to Les Magoon and Wally Dow. And they talked about systematically building play sheets. And of course, uh, lots of effort have been given. I'd like to give out a shout to David White from Exxon on his play-based analysis. And other leading companies in the industry have talked about play-based evaluations. I think that those kinds of analysis are really critical. And most importantly is keeping them up to date with a continuity of effort when new things happen. In addition to migrated plays, there are some migrated plays that get a late structural tilt. And for those of us who know the Permian Basin, have worked the Permian Basin, the residual oil zone happens when there is a later uplift and meteoric fluids tilt the oil water contacts, leaving residual oil. And what's amazing to me, having studied many of these great super basins, is that this is not a rare phenomena. And again, with help from Steve Meltzer and Bob Trennan, we started to compile that there are many residual oil zones all around the world. Huff and Breyer are doing some great work on and APG bulletins of special issue on looking in the carrier beds and using stimulation to actually produce from carrier beds. And some great work here by um, uh, one of our good colleagues pointing out the other places where carrier beds, analogs, and possible plays may yet may yet occur. And so, as we think about the producing the unconventional resources, I'd like to point out that this slide from Scott Sheffield, the CEO of Pioneer, shows why the thickness and interbedding of source rock with crunchiness makes the Wolfcamp in the Delaware and the Midland basins so attractive. You can see that the thickness is, of course, very important for getting the net feet up. But there are other types where there's a tight reservoir sandwiched between source rocks, classically the Bakken, or thick deposits like the Marcellus, that is um, a thick pile of source rock. So different types of architecture. So now, as we segue, let's talk about super basin thinking toolkit item number 3. understanding the various types of reservoir. These are for conventional plays and migrated, um, but you need to understand the source to the sink. And so there's some great work here by Michael Blum, recent past president of SEPM, and you can see the drainage areas and the associated fans. There's some great work by Henry Pettingill and Paul Weimer looking at what makes a great deepwater field and the concentration of um, thick reservoir packages, high concentrations of hydrocarbons, not just a lot of hydrocarbons, but hydrocarbons concentrated in thick areas that make recovery much easier. Spread out hydrocarbons are a lot more costly to develop in thin beds than thick piles of very rich hydrocarbons. And one of the things in the unconventional plays, in every one of the super basins, there are amazing surprises in clinoforms. So in the Bakken, you can see the condensed section in the Bakken where some of the source rocks and silty zones that fill it in that become landing zones in the toe of slope. You can see on the upper right a great example from Rick Fritz where the Marimatian plays are all the actual clinoforms, and the top seal is the Chester. So here's an example of toe sets being productive. Here's an example of foresets being productive. Here's an example from the Vaca Muerta, very seismogenic play. Again, very toe sets and perhaps basal foresets are productive. And then the Bajanov in the West Siberian Basin has it all because it's sitting on top of a source rock and it gets pays from the bottom sets, from the foresets, and the top sets. And other exciting examples of top sets, some work by Lupo and Kristinic, where they've identified sand in the top set and bars and the ability using horizontal wells to more efficiently drain it. And then some great examples um, from Alaska and the Brookian, where you can see the recent discoveries. So, lesson super basin thinkers is when you're in a basin and a petroleum system, look at all the different types of clinoforms. The bottom set, foreset, top set, because all can be productive in the right setting. Look, I just love this from Oklahoma. You can't look at the shingling in those clinoforms. So let's talk a little bit about traps, giant fields, and what we can learn from them. And this is a diagram that shows the approximately 1,000 giant fields of the world and the AAPG regions, which I think it's really interesting because what it tells me is that every one of AAPG's regions has at least one or many super basins, and all of them have giant fields, and all of them drive the economies of each of these regions and the geoscience. And you can do things when you use the APG Giant Fields database that's in our memoir 125, put together by John Dolson, to look at areas and see when there's almost all giant structural traps or almost all structural traps. You can ask questions like, well, where are the stratigraphic traps? Because every basin has a combination of them, and if you don't see them, maybe they need systematic exploration. And so these are the kinds of things that you can use when you're uh, prospecting. So a few words about stratigraphic traps. And as I said, Mike Halbouty was encouraged us for the deliberate search for stratigraphic traps. What's amazing is that in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and maybe up into the 90s, stratigraphic traps made up 10 to 15% of new giant discoveries. Recently, in the 2000s and 2010, we're seeing 50 and 60% of new giant discoveries be either stratigraphic traps in the form of uh, turbidites or in carbonates or in combination stratigraphic and structural traps. And largely this is because of a incredible improvement in seismic imaging. So it's exciting to see this new wave of giant fields and trap types. So let's talk a little bit about analogs. These are the key elements. If you have a 30-second elevator speech on what makes the Permian work, it's number one, it's a large basin with rich source rocks deep in the section, many stacked reservoirs filling in the basin, a regional top seal, and a relatively undeformed basin, central uplift in this case, but for the most part, it's not too heavily disrupted, and it's all thermally mature in the oil and gas window. And there's a late tilt in the Permian, as we've talked about. So that gives you that extra little wrinkle of residual oil traps. So, interestingly, we see those similar elements in the West Siberian superbasin. And here's some work from Alexei Milkov. And here's the onshore part of the West Siberian Basin. Here's the extension into the offshore South Kara Sea. Many similarities, source rocks deep in the section, many reservoirs stacked, and a good tight regional seal. Except that, as Alexei makes a point, simple basin equals super basin, yes, but look at the scale. You may notice this 500-kilometer bar. This little diagram looks familiar. That's the Permian Basin to scale, the U.S. Permian Basin. It's fun to look at other analogs of superbasins like the Western Canada or the Appalachian superbasin. Here are some slides from Bill Zagorski showing that the deformation belt to the east is broken up and the main plays for the Marcellus and Utica are in the less disturbed portions of the fold and thrust belt. And here in the fold and thrust belt, lots of fractures. Here in the less disturbed areas, less natural fractures, but more fractures that can be stimulated. Here is Western Canada, another fold and thrust belt. This way it's verging from the west to the east. And you can see the big stacked pays in the petroleum systems trying to achieve, from Paul McKay's work, trying to achieve lower pressure as they migrate ultimately out into oil sands, but lots of overpressure and lots of packages of thick oil. This is a great example of work done by Chris Cheatwood and Alfredo Guzman comparing the Sprayberry trend of the Permian Basin with the Chicontepec Basin in Mexico. Very similar fans and deltas filling in a thick pile. You can see here in Mexico, thick piles of lensatic sands coming in and lots and lots of source rock and tight siltstone and sandstones that can be stimulated. But the difference is the Chicontepec area has very few wells drilled because it just doesn't have the resources, financial resources. It's an economically arrested basin. There are a lot of these around the world that have potential that are waiting for something to kickstart. And while we're on the subject of analogs, I would like to just show this one more time of the beautiful subsalt of Gulf of Mexico and the pre-salt of Brazil, hidden provinces that have been revealed. So now on to number 5, economics. Some of the things that make the super basins critical are your ability to, or companies' abilities to make money. And I'd like to shout out that working with service companies and working at scale to keep costs low is critical in the economic, and that the hydrocarbons that are produced and the jobs that are created create a prosperity for the regions. A great example of this, of course, would be uh, Exxon and Hess's discoveries in Guyana. I also want to point out that there is a linkage too, as our good friend Scott Tinker likes to say, the triple E, energy, environment, and economics go hand in hand. So let's say a word or two about environment and the importance to continue to make progress on being a more environmentally friendly. These things are operator, and these things are interrelated. Good environmental practices make for good economics and for bringing forward energy. And I love to talk about this quote from Wallace Pratt: good geologists make good neighbors. And you see a couple of examples of where social license, proactive cases of social license. Susan Morris, there? Hey, Susan. Thank you for being an inspiration to all of us. So now the seventh, the creativity, the creativity that sharpens the saw, that keeps us ever productive, ever resourceful. And what we see in these super basins is that there are short cycle workflows and long cycle workflows. And if you're a professional and young professional, you need to be aware of both of these. These are the things that are suit your talents and your abilities and your preferences. And it might be a good thing to try both of them. And those who are engaged in the short cycle resources, engineering and unconventional, may lots of uh, data analytics. Super basins are super data rich, and a continual optimization, very fast pace, drilling lots of wells. Um, the long cycle exploration, and I want to give a thank you to Gary Stevens and Neil Brunsdorf, showed in some of the deep water environments, it takes a long time from coming up with some ideas, acquiring the acreage, developing the prospect, drilling the well, doing appraisal drilling, and first oil. And of course, the key is to shorten the cycle. And some of the most successful examples in our discovery thinking forums do exactly this. If you saw the Zord discovery before, you'll be amazed at how E&I has been able to shorten this. So these are the types of workflows. And I like to think we've about the technology transfer because companies, some companies, if you're a small company like my company, Star Creek, we work a few basins. If you're a big company like one of the majors, you may work many basins. And how do you, if you're a Chevron, transfer your best practices from similar basins, among similar basins, and how can we as APG be a catalyst for technology transfer? And that's why we started the Superbasin initiative to fuel the creativity of the entire industry. So that's it, folks. Just a quick recap. We've talked about the technology. Uh, Geoscience is key and integrative. We've talked about the source rocks, the various habitats where petroleum resides. We've talked about reservoir issues, thinking from source to sink, the importance of clinoforms, the trap types, always important, but and tectonic setting, but a very important thing to think about is simple basins seem to be awfully good basins, and we are seeing more stratigraphic traps, elusive, illuminated, and abundant. and immerse yourself. If you want to, if you're a young professional and you want to be successful, analogs are a shortcut to wisdom. Experience in as many forms as you can get it give you insights to each and every prospect drilling um, location. Economics drive the super basins. If you can't just be a technical master, you have to be a commercial master. You have to have be a good partner. You have to have appreciate your service companies and the communities in which we live and operate. And it all comes back to creativity, workflows, multidisciplinary cooperation. So I want to end with this slide. The greatest source of all renewable energy is the human mind. It is the greatest source of energy, is the energy within us. I want to thank you for your participation, for being here. I welcome some questions, and